So Ken, you had a couple of interesting news stories about the Department of Homeland Security. First, tell us about your source telling you about lists that they're keeping of so-called domestic terrorists.
Yeah, so they have been tasked formally to take pictures and identifying information of anyone who's taking pictures of them. That's it. They don't have to be doing anything else. So protesters standing on the street taking a photograph of an ICE agent or a Border Patrol agent or anyone in the task force, that's enough. That's sufficient cause for them to run your license plate, to take a picture of you and use the biometrics, bring that back for what was described to me as a run-up by intelligence, which is kind of an informal way of saying they're going to run you through a database and see what they can find out about you so they can map your associations and try to figure out, as was described to me, what this network of actors is, because the Trump administration is convinced, without any evidence that we've seen publicly, that there's some kind of orchestrated effort to fund and bankroll and motivate these protesters.
Yeah. Well, look, so on the funding of things, I totally get it, because the right wing is doing projection. In almost all the right wing protests are financed by some corporate interest, and they don't know that. The people going to the protests don't know that at all. But of course, the famous case of the Koch brothers pulling up with giant buses for the Tea Party guys with messages that help their corporation and abuse the American people, on and on it goes. So they assume the left is doing it as well. But Ken, I wanted to ask you, they're putting this as so-called domestic terrorists. That's super scary. I want to come back to that. But take away the title. Is any part of this program seemingly illegal? Or can they go, okay, you went to a protest, your left-wing protest or a right-wing protest, I'm now going to gather all the information I can about you and keep you on a list?
I think the scariest thing about it is that it probably is legal, because President Trump designated quote unquote Antifa as a domestic terror group, the first such designation of any domestic American group publicly via executive order like that. And from that and NSPM 7, presidential memorandum he promulgated last year, that gives extraordinary power to the intelligence community to target Americans with a lot of the same sorts of tools that they used against groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS, foreign terrorist organizations, real ones with financing and institutional structure, almost like states. They can use all of that now against what the administration considers to be Antifa. And when I was reporting on this early on, a big frustration of mine was it was sort of met with skepticism on the part of a lot of people who said, oh, there's no such thing as Antifa. But guys, this is Trump's definition of Antifa. He might define that differently than you and I do. He might define that much more broadly than you and I do. And I think that's what we're seeing happen now.
Ken, this is tangential to the main conversation, and I'm going to get back to the abuse of our rights, et cetera. But I'm going to ask you a funny question. Is there even such a thing as Antifa? Because what I mean by that is, I get that some guys went to protest some years ago, and I guess they called themselves Antifa. So I'm not saying that that didn't happen. What I'm asking is there any infrastructure, as far as you can tell, any real organization? Because I've never seen it. It doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. That's why I'm asking.
I think it exists in the sense that Anonymous exists, the hacker collective from the 2010s or so, and that is to say, it's a word that people might use to describe themselves. But do they have a physical location? Do they have a PO box? Do they have an LLC? The answer to those questions is no. I mean, I assume there's some nonprofit out there, maybe somewhere, that has two guys that they call Antifa or something. But any kind of presence commensurate with those groups I was talking about before, Al-Qaeda and ISIS, no way, not even close. Not even close. I mean, I've gone to these protests and kind of had some fun asking people, saying, "Are you Antifa? Have you seen the Antifa cell?" And a lot of people would say, "Yeah, I'm Antifa." Like, I would consider myself opposed to fascism, but it was clear that there's no, formal group or designation. So a lot of this is like what you said at the top of the segment, where there are these, I would go to protests, and sometimes there'd be some Democrat group, present somewhere. That doesn't mean that everyone in the group is like being directed by them, or that's just the guys that set up the first thing. And then there's a lot of spontaneous participation on the part of ordinary people that want to go out and do something. It doesn't mean that it's all some orchestrated plot. So long story short, do I think the admin can find some shaky basis to say, oh, this guy has Antifa on his Instagram account or something? Yeah, I'm sure. And that's why I'm very skeptical of the idea that the law is going to protect us here, because they can find, just like with statistics, you can make a case with anything. And that's how the law is for national security in this country, unfortunately.
But Ken, one more thing about that. Any source you have in intelligence, in Homeland Security, in the government at all, ever show you anything that says, yeah, this money from Antifa headquarters or a funder, that it doesn't call themselves Antifa, but is a funder, has gone to this branch of Antifa or that branch of Antifa? Because I've never seen that in the news. They just say like, oh, Antifa is this or that, but I've never seen any facts regarding that at all, especially when it comes to funding. But again, I don't want to miss it. Have you ever had anybody show you evidence like that?
Well, I have seen one intelligence report, and you're going to laugh at my saying this. It was based on, they have some kind of commercial database that they can trawl through and find information about people. And I'll report this at some point. And they described someone as being a key figure within Antifa. And so I am, leafing through this intelligence report. And I realize their evidence for that this guy's Antifa is like you were saying before. He had Antifa on his profile on his social media account or something. And they take that to mean, oh, he must be a critical node within the structure. So a lot of what's happening is these guys were trained and came up in what's called the global war on terror, fighting those groups I was describing before, Al Qaeda and ISIS. And so the way you go about fighting those groups is the theory was to map out the structure and figure out who's financing it, where are the fighters, where are they being trained. They're taking that exact same approach. Someone like Kash Patel, the FBI director, came up in that exact war on terror, and that's what they've been trained to do. And so that's what they're applying to this, very loosely organized group, to quote Trump's first FBI director, who he fired, a loosely affiliated just idea, not a organized group. And so I have seen intelligence report, but that doesn't mean that it exists in the sense that you're asking me. It just means that some guys in a room got together and convinced themselves that it does.
Yeah, so no checks or anything that they've gotten, that they've tracked. Interesting. Look, I don't want to give them any ideas, but the analogy there is, it's like I call myself a populist. Populism is not a group, it's not an organized infrastructure, but there's tons of populists in the country, right? And from time to time we organize as in, hey, let's go and do a protest or let's go do a petition. Is that a group now? No, it's just populism. And by the way, you could say that about capitalists, you could say it about Marxists, you could say it about almost anyone. That's just a general term for folks. But okay, now back to the main point. So what happens if you're on this list? Do you know if there's any ramifications yet?
So what was described to me was that Border Patrol in particular, who is central to this whole ICE operation, we use ICE as shorthand, but ICE is really the task force that's in charge. It involves a lot of Border Patrol agents too, because they can operate within 100 miles of any border, which happens to include where most of Americans live. They are taking this. I know that they're taking this information back and they plug it into a database called IRS. I can't remember exactly what it stands for. I'll have a story about it shortly. And what that does is it spits out information about where they live, their home address, property. They're running their favorite thing to do is run license plates. And if you look at the video that was posted a couple days ago, where one person was just photographing the law enforcement, this was an observer. He starts taking pictures of her license plate, and she says, "Why are you doing that?" And he says, "Because we got a nice little database, and now you're going to be a domestic terrorist. So have fun with that." An ICE agent actually said that on camera to this woman, who, as far as I can tell, wasn't doing anything but just taking a picture of him. So I went back, talked to my own sources, and they said, "Yeah, we plug it into this database that gives us this whole network of information to kind of profile these individuals. And what we do, if you try to see, do they have outstanding warrants? Can we tie them to other actors that we're watching? All based on this worldview that there's some kind of orchestrated cabal that's pulling the strings behind these things, as opposed to what I have seen when I go and talk to protesters, which is just everyday people that want to get involved and care about it. And there is no big structure behind the scenes. So as I understand it, that's what's going on with this intelligence collection.
Yeah, it's interesting because you mentioned they're basically trying to treat American citizens like they would with ISIS or Al Qaeda. And I'm a little bit worried about something I've called Israelification of our government. That once you label someone a terrorist, as Israel does, then you could do anything you want to them, including killing them. And because they're enemies of the state, they're the boogeyman, they're the terrorists. Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. Totally not true, but it does keep you updated on our live shows.